Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 496, featuring Jason Smith, who is the senior VFX supervisor for the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power series that is available on Amazon. We're now on season 2. Really great guy. Jason was working over at ILM for almost 25 years and is now working studio side to do lots of amazing work, including the Rings of Power, which is really cool to have him on. He has an amazing career. He's the kindest guy, really so nice. He's actually been nominated for an Oscar and has actually won a Sci-Tech Academy Award for his work on Blockparty. So really cool to have him on. Talk a lot about that. Talk a lot about his passion for animation and rigging and all the things that he's done there. And he's got a great career that led up to this really great work that he's been doing for the Rings of Power. So really excited to talk about all of those things. So thank you so much, Jason, for being on. I do have a couple of things I'd like to say about the podcast. As you guys may have noticed, if you follow the podcast very regularly, I have not been very regular, and I want to apologize for that. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of things going on in my life that has made it a little bit more challenging to post regular things, and I'm going to continue to take a little bit of a hiatus because I got to take care of a lot of stuff on the back end. But this is certainly to tell you that this is not the end of the podcast. In fact, it is super exciting that I'm going to have a lot more. But I'm probably going to, after this podcast, this episode comes out, I'm probably going to take another break again. But I will start to post things regularly, starting right at the beginning of 2025. That's when I'm going to resume all of these other podcasts. But like to say, this is not the end of the podcast at all. In fact, I have recorded, this is episode, like I said, 496, but I've already recorded the 500th episode, which will be 10 years and 500 episodes of the podcast. I've been waiting for a long time for that. And that is a very exciting one. So guys, look forward to that one in the early parts of 2025. And we'll have many more after 500 also. So don't worry about that. So just letting you know a little bit about the schedule. And if you're new to the podcast, of course, you have plenty more episodes to listen to. Since I've recorded these for so long. So you can always go back to the library and listen to some of those. But just giving you a little heads up, I want to post this podcast since I recorded it a while ago, and I wanted to get it out because it's been sitting in the bank for a little bit. But let's go listen to Jason, and then, of course, you guys will resume the podcast in January 2025. Okay, a couple of announcements before things get too long. I just want to let you guys know that V-Ray 7 is officially out. It is very exciting. The big news, obviously, about that is that Gaussian splat ray tracing is out. We are one of the first ray tracers that is able to actually ray trace a Gaussian splat and ray trace them within CG geometry. It's kind of a big deal. So definitely go check that out. Other great new features. I'm going to sort of ramble through them real quick because there's a lot of them. But virtual toolers inside of V-Ray is available, which is kind of cool as well. We have a new firefly removal. If you guys are know a lot about ray tracing and you know about fireflies, we have a new tool for firefly removal, which is very cool. We have a new sun and sky system that allows you to go for sun systems that are just below the horizon, creates for great sunsets. We have a lot of new updates to the virtual frame buffer, including custom region renders, which are beyond rectangles. We have a vignetting system that we've added as well in post, and new color correction presets. We've got a bunch of new scatter tools, including instance brushes, distribution brushes. We've got Lumiere support, which is new to Cosmos. It's a special way of doing a lighting distribution for specific lights. Look into that. It's really cool. Actually, Vlado wrote a blog post about it, which is pretty interesting as well. We have some new profilers. We have a new geometry tab and a V-Ray lister, which is exciting. We have a bunch of new updates to V-Ray GPU, including faster time to first pixel and support for caustics. Oof. We have a new out-of-core implementation, which is also super exciting for the guys who have lots of RAM or don't have a lot of RAM on your GPUs and you still want to be able to get some new out-of-core stuff going, which is pretty exciting. We've extended our USD support. I'm very excited. And we have open PBR support as well. So that is a lot for V-Ray 7. and definitely go check it out at chaos.com. Again, I also want to mention V-Ray 2.6 is out as well, and that has a bunch of new updates as well. Vantage 2.6 is out as well, and that has a bunch of new updates, including a new subsurface scattering support, which is exciting, a new water displacement support, which we have as well. We have a full opacity support now, not just ones and zeros. We support all the in-betweens as well, which is very exciting on the opacity side. We have a new clipper. We have V-Ray clipper that we support. We have VR controller support. So if you guys didn't know that we actually have VR support inside of Vantage, we now support controllers that you can add to Vantage, which is also very exciting, and a bunch of new camera tools. So lots of stuff going on. Just go to chaos.com for our products. Make sure and check out what's new in V-Ray 7 and in Vantage 2.6. I don't have a lot of announcements in terms of events because it is kind of the end of the year. Things are winding down. We will have a couple of people that are going to be at SIGGRAPH Asia, which is happening right as this podcast comes out. So if you happen to be at SIGGRAPH Asia, we won't have an official booth, but we will have some people from Chaos that'll be there. So just make sure if you see them, just say hi and let them know what's going on. In terms of the podcast, like I mentioned, we will be resuming our podcasts January 2025. But if you guys want to know more about the podcast, you guys can just go to chaos.com/CGGarage. You can follow us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/CGGarage podcast. We have a new YouTube channel for those of you who have been following us on YouTube that is dedicated just for the podcast, and that is youtube.com/@CGGarage podcast, youtube.com/@CGGarage podcast. That is where we put all of this podcast-specific videos up there if you would like to see the videos as well. And if you have suggestions for podcasts, let us know. We get a lot of them, including this one was a suggestions. A lot of people have been reaching out, which is really cool. Just make sure and email us, labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com for all of your suggestions in terms of episodes or feedback, whatever you'd like to do. That is the best way to reach us. But for now, please enjoy episode number 496 with Jason Smith.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
I'm very excited to have you on, Jason. This is really cool. I know you've got an incredible career, an incredible work in front of you, and I think people would love to know a little bit more about that. Obviously, you've been at ILM for ever.
Yeah, like I was just thinking, it's not that far for 25 now.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. Almost 25 years at ILM, which is really amazing. So how did it start in terms of your interest in computer graphics?
Oh man, it started with creatures, I'll say. Like
with
when
creatures.
I was with creatures. Yeah, when I was a little kid, like 4 and 5 years old, I started asking my parents for the Universal Monsters action figures. They were like Star Wars figures, but they were like the Mummy and Dracula and stuff like that. And I was just like, I was that kid when we would draw pictures. I would ask my mom, how do I draw Frankenstein? And she would draw a rectangle and then some bolts at the neck. And, so I still remember how to draw those things she taught me. Dracula is a heart, by the way, with a line on the top.
Was your mom an artist as well?
She actually is. Yeah, she was a painter when she was young. She doesn't do anything anymore, but I think that a lot of that juice came from her genetics for sure. Yeah.
Right.
She was very creative. She did some beautiful paintings, I think, in college. Yeah.
Amazing.
But yeah, I think, I went from there, but then part of my, the type of brain that gets hyper-focused on things.
Yeah.
Part of that brain, I think, was also really into geometry and shapes. And I used to make paper cubes and paper icosahedrons and paper dodecahedrons. And something about that made me so interested when I saw the first computer graphics stuff and like Tron, when I was a kid. And like I saw, that's the stuff I like to make. Yeah. And it all kind of led into me getting a Commodore 64.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned how to program. When I was like 8 or 10, I was programming little demos for my family. Love you, Mom. And it kind of went from there. I was going to be a makeup artist, though. That's where it all led to first. Is I was going to be.
You wanted to be in the Scott. The Rick Baker school.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. Like those guys, I idolize. And like when I was 10, I was like, rewinding Legend to see like, okay, it's Rob Bottin, whoever that is, and it's Miles Tevis did the design, and like I was just like a huge fan. And it was until I was about 17 that I met a guy at college, and by then I was pre-med. I was trying to be realistic, and this guy that I met came back from Legacy Studios, which was Stan Winston at the time, I think. And he said, "Hey, this movie Jurassic Park just came out, and don't do this anymore, because it's going to go away." That's what they were thinking. I think what's happened in reality. I was talking to some people from KMBFX. They were saying it's never been more work than this. Right. And I think our show is a great example. Our show had 1,500 orc makeups, and I'm talking like latex and silicone and apply like 1,500. That's that's bigger than anything I grew up on. So it's a convoluted path. I tell students like, don't worry if it doesn't make sense right away. Right. Concentrate on your art. Concentrate on drawing with a pencil, and you're going to be a better off visual effects artist than anything.
Yeah. I think paying attention to where technology is going is always beneficial, but doing what you love is almost more important, right?
Oh, totally. Like, well, that was what I learned because I was pre-med, and I was just it was not working, man. Like I was in the makeup lab every night. I was like designing Into the Woods for the university, which now looking back is like so fun. I did the witch with a quick change makeup, and I did the wolf on Will Swenson, who went on to star in Hair for like 15 years. And it was. I had to finally admit to myself, I'm not going to microbiology class. I'm just not going.
Where were you going to school?
I was going to Brigham Young University. I was raised in the Pacific Northwest, so that was kind of part of my upbringing there.
Well, there's a great computer graphics area.
Yeah, I got to say we were really lucky. That was really just kind of ramping up too. Well, no, I know what you mean. You mean like Utah in general, Utah Teapot and all that stuff. Yeah, all that history was there. But when I was starting at BYU, the animation program was just started, computer animation.
Right. Okay.
And I had already gone too far down the road, but I said, hey, can I join some classes? I just want to learn how to do this stuff just because I'm just really into it. And I remember the professor who is a really nice guy. At the time, he saw this computer science nerd, and he was like, you can, just don't touch the computers. So I would stay after everybody was done, and everybody would just go home, and I would get on Alias 2.0, I think it was. Man, I sound old when I start talking like this.
But hey, listen, I was on the same things.
Really?
It's okay. Yeah.
It's a convoluted path for me. I don't know how it was for you, though, but it was... Yeah,
I was doing it in architecture school. Believe it or not,
I hear that so much.
Yeah, I did. I went to Rice Architecture School, and they had invested for some reason in a bunch of STIs for architects, which didn't really make any sense. But they had Wavefront and Alias installed on these computers, and I was like, "What's this?" And no one else was using those computers, and they had like 10 of these.
This
STIs.
Is what I'm talking about. Yes.
We had a donor.
Yeah. So you were in a similar boat, like you're surrounded by these machines that what people don't understand. So this is for all the young people. What we're talking about is that when you sat down at an SGI, you were sitting down at a $1998 $25,000 to $45,000 machine, like flat out, and they weren't discounted. You had
that was just for the hardware, and then the software was another $50,000.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was and most people who were sitting down at the computer at my university were using it for email.
Oh my gosh! You're watching them on the SGI.
Yeah, SGI using it for email, right? That's like taking the space shuttle to 7-Eleven.
It is so funny. I remember we had an Indigo. Which was like a little bit of a level up, and all the students would leave. Like they would have their projects that they were working on, but they would just leave. I would shut the door, and there was a curfew at BYU, so I would shut the door and kind of lock the door, and then I would stay in there all night, and I would run from computer to computer launching render jobs, and my work was horrendous.
Yeah, sneaker net turning on computers. Like,
yes.
And then you didn't have any render queue, so he's like, okay, this computer does frame 1 to 100, 101 to 200.
Yeah. I was the render queue, but it set me up well for tape IO and render support. Which when I got to ILM,
how did you get the job at ILM?
It's funny actually. I was going to get my master's in computer graphics, and I don't know if I really have the mind for that kind of like research. Like I like to mock things up, and when I code, I'm pulling this thing that I heard once and this thing that I heard once and putting them together and seeing how they work. So I'm not very formal, and I was signed up though. I was getting ready to do it. And my wife at the time said, why don't you just apply and just see what happens? And I'm like, I don't want to apply and not be ready. And then they're like, oh, that's the guy who's not ready. So I was like really worried about it, And she convinced me, and they ended up flying me down. So I flew down to San Francisco I was interviewing as a tape IO assistant.
What
my job
year was this about?
It would have been 2001.
Okay.
2001.
Yeah, that's
right
what they
near
did.
the end.
They did. I mean, I know that when you're starting jobs at ILM at that time, and you probably know better than I do, but I've heard that like even if you're like a PhD student, it's like you start there. You start.
Yep. So we were surrounded by by the way, I have to tell you, like the alumni of like the tape IO room or the render support room, you're surrounded by these people who he becomes the layout supervisor on Rango, and she becomes the model supervisor on Avengers: Age of Ultron, and you're surrounded by those people that just got out of school, and like when I went and applied, I showed them some programming samples and some figure drawing, and some graphics code that I had done, and some sculptures and some makeups, and so like I was showing them all these different things, and they said they would call me back in 2 weeks if I got the job, and they never called me back. And this is a story I tell everybody, but like I finally called to say thank you for the interview, and the girl the lady on the phone was like, I didn't call you. You've got a start date. You're supposed to be here January 16th, I think it was.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was right at the beginning of 2002 that I kicked it off there.
That's funny. Yeah, you just follow up.
Yeah, just follow up. Because I was a little embarrassed. I was like, thanks for rejecting me, but I just called up and she's like, no, you need to be here.
Yeah, you have a start date.
Yeah, it was so funny at the time. I didn't know Linux. I didn't know any of that stuff. And
so you were just starting in the IO department, I guess. How long were you there?
Well, I was there actually 2.5 years. And I got to say, a lot of people around me fell away because this is the .com era, right? So people were making millions by just like going somewhere and like doing something that sells like, pet names or something,
Sure.
And that happened a lot. But I just stuck it out. I couldn't wait. And the 2.5 years, it got really hard the last year because I wanted to do creative work and I was just render support. So my job was to show up at about 6 o'clock at night, PM, and with a bunch of other people who were also really amazing people to work with. We would sit at our computers. We'd each get our queue of jobs. And, it would be like, okay, you've got, 13 Hulk shots and 20, Master and Commander shots, whatever it was. And you'd have to watch them all night. You'd just watch the frames pop off. And if Hulk's pants turned pink, you'd call the TD in the middle of the night and wake him up. Right. And you'd say, hey, Hulk's pants are pink. So in the dailies, you're not going to have anything. And it's like, well, try going to this file and go to this file. So what would happen is you'd learn. Right. You were learning by not just like, let's set up a Hulk in a debug, in a tutorial. No. You were like, it's broken. Can you fix it? And so it was this weird thing where it was like the lowest of the low, but at the same time, it was we all came out of that galvanized, because it's like when you see a render artifact, you're like, looks like your your step size on your your bray marching might be a little off there. You'd know all those things because you had been in the middle of it, and they had a training library of VHS tapes and DVDs. Right. So we could walk over to the wall, grab a VHS tape of like, this rigging supervisor saying how you rig a biped at ILM. And it was pretty amazing actually. Like those times I was really lucky because you could get your stuff going, and I started to automate a lot of my job, and so that stuff would be going, and then I'd have like 2 hours where people would fall asleep or something, but I would put in the James Tooley tape, and I remember one day I was just like rigging Mighty Joe Young's hand. Like we would restore the backup because we were the backup crew, we would restore the backup and just like work on, okay, let me just get the skin to move with the hand. And people who haven't done creature work in in 2002, it was a hairy job to get, just fingers to bend like fingers,
Yeah.
And
Put
so
it in
I-
2.5 years as a night shift in that.
Yeah.
That's a sign of commitment.
A lot of us did, though, and I think that a lot of us knew at the same time that we were learning. Like, I picked up Linux, I picked up Python, I started
Right.
writing stuff that like automated parts of the job. And then when Master and Commander came along, they needed more creature people that could just make the skin move with the body. And I was like, I've been doing this Mighty Joe Young thing. And they're like, well, who told you to do that? And there was a whole thing about like, well, he's not really on the show. We can't let him, touch the assets. But they ended up deciding, and they got it all official, so I was able to do it legally. They gave me like all the sailors and just let me stick their skin to their bones. And so Master and Commander was my first actual production work. That was
Awesome.
And I was watching shots at the same time.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
It was really exciting. Everything was exciting at that time, and I thought that everything exciting had already happened. Actually, like at that time, I thought like everything cool had already kind of gone by us.
Well, there's always something cool. I mean, honestly speaking. But so that was it, right? Like rigging seems to be the thing that you were really excited about.
Yeah, because it was creatures, and with a TD, I might be lighting like a file cabinet, but
Right.
with creatures, it's like, well, here's this thing with 4 arms. How are you going to make that work?
Right.
Here's one of the pirates is the twins, that has 3 legs. How are you going to make that work? And I on Van Helsing, I really started picking up flesh simulation too, which was kind of like a niche thing. And a few of us knew how to do it, and most of the heavy lifting was being done by the R&D guys, that were doing that stuff. Christopher Twigg and Ryan Kautzman and Ronald Fedke, who was the guy at Stanford who was over all these guys, who was like this genius simulation guy. But we learned how to push the buttons, and we learned a lot about simulation by doing that. It really caught on with me, man. I don't know how to describe why. It just like it was creatures.
Right. And that was the thing you loved, right? From the beginning, so.
Yeah. Like even when I was a kid doing makeup, I loved the mold making as much as anything. Because
Right.
making molds to make like a rubber makeup like Hellboy or something,
Sure.
it's like this super technical process that like only a few people can do super well.
Right.
And rigging is kind of that way too. You just have to learn as an animator, what would I want? If I move the leg, do I want the ankle of the cheetah to come along with it a little bit, or do I want it to stay behind because I want to own that motion? Well, you want both.
Right. Yeah.
What was your background?
I was lighting. I loved lighting.
Yeah,
to me,
yeah.
it was like being the virtual camera was what I loved. Right.
Oh, there you
it's
go.
the way-
There you go.
So it's just to see what it looks like and to make things look real and to have. I mean, as an architect, I was always like global illumination was my passion. And
Oh
so
my
it was weird.
gosh! Oh,
Yeah.
you're gonna get to me because radiosity was my thing.
Oh, really?
Do you know radiosity? Like, yeah,
Of course.
Of course
Using
you do.
Lightscape.
Yes. I wrote a solver in college that didn't work.
Oh, really?
It kind of worked. And then all this time, like, once I got back onto shows and I was doing real creative work, I was working on my radiosity thing on the side. So if you go to deluxerender.com, I'm sure you're going to rush there.
Oh,
You'll see my my little experiments that probably stopped in COVID, I think.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
definitely did that. Yeah, I got passionate about global illumination. And obviously, that's what attracted me to V-Ray in 2001, actually, around that same time. So and so it's like we've got to solve global illumination, and it was and then finally, like when it was like ray tracing is viable.
Yeah.
And
Monte Carlo methods and everything.
Yeah, and I was like, wait a minute, this is amazing. So because before radiosity was like it took a lot of memory.
Oh, totally. And it was the thing, and it was an algorithm. Again, for the youngsters, that was designed for like the hardware at the time that was made for scanline rendering. Scanline rendering would like go, line by line and like who's in front, and really quickly. And radiosity would go from a patch of polygon, and it would like make a camera and scanline render the scene.
Right.
Not as color, but as identity. And then those identities would lock together in a big matrix and they'd solve the light transport, I loved it too. It's such an elegant algorithm,
It is. And it was interesting because it was really sort of designed for people doing lighting design, physical lighting design, right?
Yeah,
and for actual light values and intensities. And so...
And once you see what it does,
it's like
you can't imagine that we could live without it,
Yeah.
It's like, people used to, at Pixar, they used to put like hundreds of lights in there just to try to get
Yeah.
what radiosity could do.
Yeah, before we were switched to ray tracing, I remember doing something. You just put 100 lights around a character just to imitate the global illumination. Now we just do an HDR and it does everything for you.
Right. Well, you coming from architecture though, that's one of those things. There's a few jobs that are really artistic and really technical.
Yeah. And there's a lot of us that came into visual effects.
I know a lot of you.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get back to you, though. Let's talk
sure.
a little bit about, obviously Master Commander and some of those projects. How did you sort of evolve through you became part of the creature team, I'm assuming, at that point.
Yeah. There was a funny thing at ILM at the time where they had a title called Assistant Technical Animator. And usually what this was it was an animator who had skill in animation.
Sure.
That was kind of technical, and they would help people fix their scenes or walk around, fix rigs. They would rig creatures, and they could be all the way from a complete amazing, human that can do anything to somebody who's just learning and stuff. But they were all animators. I got that title on a show, and I think the animation supervisor didn't know that I had never animated before, and so I made it through the first few shows doing a lot of simulation, but when I got onto Narnia, I had been writing this rigging program with a friend of mine, Jeff White, called Blockparty, which was based on a couple of key ideas. It was like if I get a polygon mesh of the creature, and then I shape it into like a gorilla or the Hulk or Dobby, well, that mesh tells me something about where every bone is, and there's hundreds of them, and it takes forever to place them, and you got to know what you're doing to place them right. And so the code was based on this idea that, well, if you give me the mesh of a human, and then you give me the same mesh as a gorilla, I should be able to tell you where those positions are. And then the second idea was this making things logical blocks that could plug into each other, so you'd have these pieces.
Was there machine learning involved in that process?
No, but you're reading my mind, because nowadays I'm like, man, why wouldn't anybody work on this? Right. But it's there was no machine learning, and it would have helped a lot. But what it would do is okay, at ILM, you'd have 10 different spines depending on what show you were on. If you're an animator, you'd go to this show and it's like, oh, I have the spines with these controllers. Oh, I have this other spine. Because a spine is this bendy thing that has all these other rigs hanging off of it. It has the arm hanging off of it, off the clavicle. It has a scapula hanging off of it. It has the neck hanging off of it. And if you change the spine, chances are you just broke the arm, the scapula, and the neck. So part of this idea was, what if we said the spine presents a socket for a neck to plug in, and a socket for an arm to plug in, and a socket for a scapula to plug in, and however you want to implement those things is fine. You do it in this sandbox, you make your spine, and in this sandbox you make your arm, and then but based on ID they would snap together, and we could suddenly rig creatures pretty quickly. And then Narnia came along, and they needed 50 creatures as a 911 show, which at the time would have been a no. We couldn't have done it.
Right.
But at that time, we took this new software and we talked to management, and I think Jeff is a very good communicator. And so I think there were 3 or 4 of us that rigged all the creatures on that show, and that was where I got this technical animation thing. So I ended up animating on this centaur, and I'm trying to do the foot compression. And if you're not an animator, oh my gosh, and if you've never done it before is a better way to say it.
Right.
It's hard. As a rigger, I was like, I get it now. I'm so sorry about everything I said.
Yeah. It's hard to animate. You know what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. I still remember some of those experiences, and I got it close, and I remember Jen Emberley had to finish it for me. So.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, this is interesting. So Blockparty was a big thing. Obviously, I know that Blockparty is well known. It's got a Sci-Tech Award, I believe, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. We got a Sci-Tech, and that was thanks to the engineers, by the way, because we put our thing together, and it did. We rigged hundreds of creatures on dozens of shows with it. But then these engineers, Mike Jutan and Rachel. Rachel Lee Rose, I think. Yeah, she came in, and Mike came in, and they just engineered it so beautifully.
Right.
That's one thing I love about the technical and the artistic, is that you start to realize how much they're the same thing. When people come in and they are so good as engineers, it's like they're painting a masterpiece. And they fixed it all, and it's still in use today, I believe, to probably to positive and negative reviews. I mean, it's a rigging tool, so it has to be, it has to be
updated.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, that was a cool one. And from there, I did Pirates of the Caribbean as just like moonlighting as mocap. So we got to be like ghost skeletons.
Right. Nice.
That was another thing at ILM at the time. You'd be talking to one guy who's a match mover, and he'd be like, "Yeah, on Star Wars, I was this guy with green tentacles," and right. They would pull us in. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so you worked on creatures for a long time. What were some of your favorite creature shows?
Oh my gosh! Well, I mean, from Lion Witch and the Wardrobe. From there, I think I went to maybe Spiderwick. No, it was Transformers.
Okay.
The first Transformers, and I was the creature supervisor now.
Oh wow!
yeah, and the model supervisor for a long time. I mean, we had a modeling crew that basically, they know how to do what they're doing. And
sure.
I was Mr. I had fresh eyes. That's all I offered. Is I would come in with fresh eyes because I was not a modeler either. And so I was the model supervisor and the creature supervisor because there was a way they were structuring the show that we could get the show, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And we didn't know how to do the transformations. Like I remember we were starting to like take a truck and cut it up and like make it, we were trying everything that you would think you would try. And in the end, what we realized is you have to put it in the hands of the animators. And I made tools we called the transformation tools at the time. I think they call it dynamic rigging now. And it went on to be used on Iron Man. Every mechanical rigging thing where things go,
right.
That's all this dynamic rigging system. It let the animators pick an arbitrary piece of geometry that wasn't rigged. And say, I want to hinge here and here and here and anywhere in space, So then that piece, you could have it spin and then rotate up this way and then kind of come out of the frame. And so if that sounds familiar, that's
sure.
how we did all the transformations on that one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that was scary, man. Like I remember sitting at my desk just thinking like, well, animation has started. All the creatures are rigged. But
right.
if they keep asking us to like rig this door panel and it has to go back through rigging, they have to change it, publish it again.
Right.
We were really in trouble, actually. It was
wow.
a really scary time that now looking back, it's like, oh, it's great.
Right. Yeah. It's probably like, it's barely going to hold together.
Well, it was Scott Benza and his team, like Rick O'Connor and those guys, that just jumped in both feet and made it work. Because they're really, really, really talented animators. They're really good at what they do. So you give them 3 hinges and they're like, okay, we got it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. So yeah, the Transformers stuff was a big deal. That's a lot of very complicated rigging that was going on back then.
Yeah, and we were dealing with multi-resolution too because we're trying to give. I mean, all the stuff that we take for granted. Probably, I don't know. Do we take it for granted yet? I hope.
I guess so. I think there's not much we're going to take for granted anymore. I think we're in a big flux stage at this point.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that, but I want to make sure we get through your career.
Right.
So yeah, let's talk a little after Transformers. What was your next big thing?
I jumped over to Spiderwick Chronicles, where I was a creature supervisor on that. And I loved that show. I had so much fun on that show. Worked with some great creature people. Geo Nakpil, I worked with him, and I ended up working with him on the Hulk later. He's a sculptor's sculptor, like really amazing artist. From Spiderwick Chronicles, I believe I jumped on over to it might have been Super 8 at the time.
Oh yeah,
I might be leaving out 1 or 2, but yeah, I think it's Super 8 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I actually left Super 8 before we were done, which is something you don't do lightly.
Yes.
Because I was offered a spot on Avengers again with Jeff, my partner in crime. He was actually taken on as the ILM supervisor for Avengers 1, and so he carved off 300 shots for me and said, do you want to come and help with the Hulk? So that was where I met like some of the most incredible artists at ILM that I think I worked on a bunch of stuff with after that,
Okay.
But yeah, that was, that was that experience of like, okay, I guess they're going to try to put all these superheroes in one movie, hadn't really been done, and I still have the memory of sitting at the Light Stage studio at the table, eating my BLT with Thor and Captain America, and and Scarlett Johansson. It was a really surreal experience, but we just wanted it to be so good. I think every bit of blood, sweat, and tears that could be was put into the Hulk, and that really kind of galvanized me in creature work in the lighting and comp as well. Like I was still learning, I think, but it really kind of was a good it was a good stepping stone for me. I think it was a place where I learned a lot. And the crew would probably say the same thing, but
Sure.
But from there, I think I did. Let's see, from Avengers. There was a Warcraft in there somewhere. I did Warcraft with Jeff again. Yeah, that was a good one. And let's see what else. And then from there, I did another Transformers. Actually, I did Transformers 5. Yeah, Transformers 5 was good times.
Nice.
And I came over to London and shot for that for 6 months and worked with Michael, and that was a blast. He's really an amazing visual artist. Like that's the funny thing. He's so bombastic that people remember that.
Sure.
But when you see him line up a shot, he's no joke. He's really, really good. And so I learned a lot by watching what he did. And from there, that was why I got the Bumblebee movie. And the Bumblebee movie is why I got Lord of the Rings.
Okay, well, let's quickly. So
We're here.
Bumblebee, yeah, we're here, which is great. So Bumblebee was a great film. Like I loved
it.
It was one of those, just enough out of the genre of
yes, I know what you mean. Yeah,
of Transformers to really sort of like make it really interesting and great character development.
Yeah.
So that was, obviously you've had a lot of experience on the Transformers things. How was it to see something a little bit in that vein?
I just loved that show. I think that was probably my first time. If I think back, I think that was my first time as the client side supervisor as well.
Oh, client side. Okay.
I left ILM at that time and partnered up with Ron Ames, who is a VFX producer, and a PhD all wrapped into one. If you work with Ron, you're going to learn a lot, And when I met him for the first time, I was just like really impressed, the stuff he was saying, and he was talking about his experience on Real Steel and stuff like that. And
I worked on Real Steel.
Did you really? Okay,
yeah.
I thought that was beautiful. It was some work that was so surprisingly seamless.
Yeah,
didn't you think?
I got it. Absolutely, I got to tell you, I myself was surprised because I saw it when we first worked at DD, and I was looking at some of the designs we were pitching for it, and then we came up with these crazy, beautiful robots, and they're like, no, and here's the concept, and the robots looked really goofy, honestly, from my perspective. Looking at the artwork, I was like, these look really goofy, and I was like, I'll work on it, and then I started working on it. It's like, this is really beautiful. This is really pretty, and looking really interesting. And then then Sean Levy was the director on it, and he's like, he's a super nice guy, by the way, and he's like, I want to have because we were doing really well on it. For some reason, we were doing great, and he says, I want to do a screening for you guys, just for the VFX guys, which, by the way, does not happen very often.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, and so he gave us a screening of the film, and we watched it. It's still in its raw state. Obviously, we knew there was a lot of shots missing because we were working on them. But we saw it, and it's like, but we all walked out. We were crying. It's like, this is a beautiful movie. Did not expect it.
He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing.
And so it was one of those things that was, we don't always get to appreciate movies. Even the ones that are good, we don't get to appreciate it because we see all the minutia, But,
totally. Yeah.
Great.
I still can't watch Avengers. It's the way it is.
Yeah. You see shot numbers as they come up, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've got my favorites in there, but it's hard, isn't it? We get too close to it.
Yeah, but I could see Bumblebee and Real Steel. There's a lot of similarities in those feelings that you can get, I'm sure.
Well, and the approach to that show was the thing that really attracted me to the way that Ron works. Mm-hmm. And then Travis Knight, who was the director on that one, and he's also notable in many other ways. Mm-hmm. Just turned out to be this really creative, nice but non-pushover, knows what he wants, knows exactly what he wants actually, and doesn't want to ask twice. But he just kind of the ideal director actually, Right. And our first conversation was just about this and that, and can we, if we're going to do that, then can we build this and this for somebody to have something to touch and these kind of things. And we both realized we were pushing things practical as much as possible. And maybe that's the old makeup artist in me, but I just if you have CG juice in your artists and you just spend it on 100% of everything, you're going to end up with 80%, right? But if you can push the practical as far as it can go, and then this is Michael's thing too, actually, Michael Bay, You push the practical as far as you can go, and then use the juice that you have in creativity and CG to close the rest of the gap. That's the way to do it, and that's actually been the thing that I've taken from Ron Ames as well, and kind of taken into every other show. Bumblebee was a blast, though. It was great.
Yeah, the way I always say is like if the only tool you know how to use is a hammer, then all your problems look like nails, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think you got to look at other tools, and I think you're absolutely right that the CG needs to be seen as the tool appropriate for the job, and not just solve it for everything, right? Yeah,
and I think that's what when you meet people nowadays, because all of us had to go through the shock of CG. And we'll talk about future shocks that are coming for us now. But we all had to go through that. And I saw model department people at ILM, model shop, the practical model shop. And some of them were kind of mad at others who were training up on CG because it was like a trader thing to do, And there was a lot of emotion behind it and stuff. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? We have these waves of things that come through humanity that we all want to reject. Like trains, they're going to make us all sick with the rattling on the rails. There was a whole thing about trains making people sick, and then people got used to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Phil Tippett pivoted, right?
and actually Phil Tippett was. I don't deserve this, but I loved it. There were 2 creature supervisors on Spiderwick, Phil Tippett and me.
Oh wow!
And I was this green kid, so I was just like, oh my gosh! I was very excited.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so you got that job on Bumblebee, and then that landed you into Lord of the Rings, right? So how did that all happen?
Well, the way it went down is the showrunners and Lindsay, the producer, who they kind of work as a team. When this show became real for them, Ron was the first person that they called. And so they got him on the phone and said, hey, we've got this show coming up. It's Lord of the Rings. And Ron was kind of looking for his big last thing to do. And he's also kind of like an educator. So he's looking for things where he's like, oh, that would be a big show with a big platform with a lot of work that would be different. And I could really show everybody how this could be. If editorial and visual effects tear down the walls and we come together more and we tear down the walls between visual effects and storyboard, he's all about kind of making this whole thing every stage. And this is, according to him, a Sean Levy story. Every stage of the movie is making the movie. When somebody's doing the boards, you don't say, when are you going to finish the boards so we can make the movie?
Right.
The answer is, no, we're making the movie right now. I'm making the movie with this pencil, So he was very excited, I think, for the educational opportunities that it would present. And so he basically agreed to do it, but I was the first person that he called.
Right.
And I had to jump from another project. But I was very lucky and happy to do it. I came and met the showrunners and we talked about what orcs should be and what ents should be and we resonated, and I think I'm lucky too because I've worked with all kinds of personalities in my career, and I'm sure you have too. There's the super nice people but they don't know what they want, and super mean people but they do know what they want.
Yeah.
And to find super
I actually
nice,
like the second sometimes because at least the decision is being made.
Yeah. Like as you get older, the meanness rolls off you like a duck's back. It's like. I did get it to the point, where Mike would be like, "Get the F off my set," and I would like, "When I'm done." And you have to, and he expects you to say when you need to do. But imagine coming onto a show where it's super nice people that really know what they want, like that really have a vision at every stage, the visuals, the story, and they also have a level of trust in what you're bringing. Like like when I bring a visual sense to what I'm doing, I'm bringing the 20 years of experience or 25 years. They look at that and value it, so you got nice people that know what they want, but they also want to listen. It's amazing.
Right.
So
yeah, that's amazing. Well, this was a tall order. Like this is like,
oh my gosh,
this is big.
Yes. Yeah. Like just to give you an idea, like we walked into the writer's room.
Yeah.
And all the episodes were broken with pieces of paper, which is where they're kind of figuring out what beats are going to go where and how are they going to interplay with. But you'd get locations, you get Numenor. Oh, just Numenor, Khazad-dûm at its peak,
Right.
Not Moria, but Khazad-dûm. And I remember walking around that room and it was a little bit exciting, of course, but it was a little bit scary too because nobody knows what Numenor wants to look like, and
Right.
we didn't have a production designer yet. And Khazad-dûm at its height, I mean, we've all fallen in love with Khazad-dûm as this haunted fortress, and
Sure.
like who could even think about what it looked like when they were having to find food to eat and stuff? And I guess they were gardening. You start to go down these little paths. But
Were you a big
Yeah.
fan of the books? And
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I was, and I would say that if I'm totally honest with you, I was an even bigger fan of all of the artwork surrounding his world, Tolkien's world. I was a fan of the Hildebrandt brothers, Greg and Tim Hildebrandt. I would look at their stuff and had their calendars, and
Wow.
and the Ted Nasmith, John Howe, Alan Lee, all those guys. I would just I would look at that art, and back then we didn't have fantasy movies. This is another
Right.
thing for the kids to hear. We didn't have
we had Legend. You mentioned Legend.
Oh my gosh, yes, Legend was great. But when they came, they were far and few between, and you'd always hear about how they failed, and it's like,
Oh yeah, Legend failed miserably.
yeah, but it's a cult classic now, it's amazing.
Gorgeous.
Oh,
It's gorgeous.
so beautiful.
And by the way, Legend is a fantastic education, a masterclass in lighting. Like,
Oh, totally. It's
like
amazing.
so good.
Yes,
Like
it's
how
so
to
good.
make color, how to use color for like when he comes out in the mirror and like
It's so good. It's so good. I was actually just looking at one of the shots where it's the forest, which is all lush and green, and then the unicorns in the middle.
Yeah.
And they almost have the forest black.
Yeah.
And the unicorns are like glowing. And that was actually
Yeah.
shot by Vic, stunt supervisor at the time, I think. But he's on our show now as a second unit director. So I was like, so on Legend, what did you...
Yeah, the flower budget on that film must have been insane.
Oh my gosh. And then it burned down. Yeah, we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
But at the time when a fantasy movie came out, it was a big deal.
It was.
And so you would spend a lot of time looking at paintings or reading books, or you didn't have time to reject shows.
Sure.
You had to just take what you got.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was amazing to be given the opportunity to do this. I will say also that the cartoons were a big thing for me. I might be alone. But
No, those are great.
Brother Theodore as Gollum is if you guys out there are not familiar with this, please look it up right now, because I think that Rankin Bass, who did
They
those
were done in
cartoons,
the 80s or
70s actually.
70s, yeah.
Yeah, and when they did these, I think that they hired a Japanese studio, and I think it might have been Ghibli. So if you haven't ever connected that before, and you look at the art again, you're like, oh, that's why, because it's
Right.
pretty amazing art. The backgrounds even are really incredible.
It was the same guys who did heavy metal, I think, wasn't it? The same.
Yeah, you might be able to correct me. I'm going off of a
I'm not
memory
sure.
of
I'm not sure.
something.
Yeah, no. It's but I remember. Yeah, it's really, really cool stuff.
It is,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
were you a little overwhelmed when you saw this? Like, oh my god, this is so much, because it's not just really
Yeah.
amazing visuals.
Yeah.
This is a full season now,
Yeah.
2 seasons of stuff.
Yeah, because I've done movies. I've done 2,000 shots.
Sure.
Well, not me.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Right.
But this was more like 5 times that or 4 times that at the time.
Right.
With some omits to bring it back down. But yeah, it was overwhelming. But I'll just tell you that I think it was the same feeling I had learning Linux as a TA.
Interesting.
I had days when I started at ILM that I was like, I'm screwing this up. They're going to kick me out. I'm not learning this fast enough. And it was
Right.
pretty much the same feeling. And yeah,
Little
over the years I've
imposter
learned. Oh yeah. I'm hoping nobody watches this. No. I think all of us should have a little imposter syndrome, because the thing
Yeah.
is, if you're ever content with what you're doing,
Yep.
it's over. It's over. You can't be content with what you're doing. You have to pick it apart, or you're
Right,
never
right.
going to improve it. You know what I mean? If you ever see an artist who's happy with what he did, you got to go walk the other way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
was scary.
Okay, well, so let's talk about some of the big challenges that you had ahead of you on the show.
Yeah. I remember one of the first ones that came up was we had a production meeting, and there was some comment about we're not going to deal with scale on set. It's going to have to be something that you guys handle in VFX.
Wow.
And when you think about that, okay, so I'm going to have an actor playing a human or an elf looking in the eyes of an emotional scene of an actor playing a dwarf or a Harfoot. And we're just going to make them different sizes. I had to go do the due diligence to come back with the answer.
Right.
But the answer was no. Unless we're making Avatar, you're not going to get away with that. And I
Right.
remember I had to go and study and I studied everything that Peter Jackson did, of course. But I went back to Darby O'Gill and the Little People and stuff. And it turns out that scale is this super rich and incredibly fun set of puzzles, that show up on productions. And when you get to a scale shot, Joe Henderson from Third Floor was my kind of man on the ground for this stuff. And we're going to talk about it later tonight. But like you get presented with the shot, and there's maybe 12 ways you could do it.
Right.
And so we learned some key things about like, well, how do you choose which one of these techniques? And shouldn't you just pick the best technique and stick with it? And what we found was that a few key things, and I'll just say a couple of them because I can talk forever, as you can tell. Yeah. Like, but the thing is, I never get to talk about what we do. Right. So when I get to talk, it's like the floodgates. But what we've learned is like when you start a scale scene, you start it big, you sell it hard. You hand off the banana from one character to the other, Right, you have them walk around each other. You move the camera. You sell big. You got to lock it in the audience's mind that just like, no. They're different sizes. Just accept that.
Right.
And then after that, once you've sold it, you can be over the shoulder of a tall double looking down on a regular sized person. And then you can be over the shoulder of a small double looking up at a regular sized person. Right. And you can cut back and forth that way. And you're mixing techniques. And then your forced perspective, and then your motion control again. And the more you mix techniques, the smart viewers who are kind of following your thread, and they're like going to figure you out, they start to get a little fatigued, and they just start to enjoy the story. Heaven forbid,
Yeah. But you get the idea of scale in mind first, and then everything else just kind of works.
Yeah, you allow yourself to kind of step out, do a tap dance for the audience, and upstage things for just a moment, like 5 seconds, and then you fade away. And if you did your job, they don't think about scale anymore. And like I've even heard from people who see the actors now standing side by side when the real actors, and they're like, whoa, that guy who plays Durin the Dwarf is very tall.
Yeah, for sure.
Scale was one of those things for sure.
And that's cool because those are like, old school film magic.
Darby O'Gill, right? Like, that's what I grew up with, Darby O'Gill. And like, it goes all the way back, like to the very beginning of film. What was it? Alice in, it wasn't Alice in Wonderland. It was based on that, but it was like Alice, I can't remember the term, but it was a silent film, right?
Sure.
And they did first perspective and trick photography and scaled props, and it is so fun. It is so fun. We're at the point now where when a new scene comes up and it's going to have scale, we see the actors rehearse, and this SWAT team just goes into motion, about like breaking down each shot and positioning the camera and making sure we don't, you can get yourself into trouble so fast, man. Like if you have to scale a shot a certain way where you have to lower the camera, you can lower it right into the ground to get the right angle.
Oh yeah.
And so anyway, that's fun.
Yeah, and then you're in Wells land where you have to make holes in the ground to put cameras in there.
I will admit that has happened once or twice. It happened on the first scale shoot. On the first season at least. We had to dig a hole for the camera to make it pass, and we had already shot the other pass and everything. So, but our formula for doing this stuff has really gotten to the point where everybody understands. Like, okay, we shot that pass. We need 5 minutes, and the scale team is comping the shot to make sure it worked before we move on. And everybody gives the time. It's a very regimented thing,
Right. Okay, well, those are so scale is obviously a big thing. What were some other big challenges that you were dealing with on that?
Well, I would say the world building, honestly, and this is a dream project in many ways, but like we basically tried to learn from Tolkien how he built the world, right? And when you look at what he did, he started with the language, He would like make up a whole language that he would never tell anybody. Like, did you know that the days of the week were for like the hobbits were terms that came through Elvish first and then became Hobbit words? Like, he wrote all that down and never used that explicitly, but he knew it. And him laying that foundation was an important part of him making up the story. He said the same thing about maps. And I've said this before, but he said that I wisely started with a map because to do it in the other direction is a painful process or something. I'm paraphrasing. But he was basically saying, if you start with the map and then you lay the story out from there, and how far are things away, and did I have to go west, or how close is this neighbor? You know, you've got the map in front of you. The story unfolds more automatically. If you write the story and then you have to figure out where the mountain ridge is, it's not good.
Right.
So yeah, we tried to take that philosophy, and anytime
So
we were doing
world building literally starts with building the map of the world.
totally, and it seems like funny to say that, but like we did that with Numenor, we did that with Khazad Dûm. You know, we started building a 3D cave map of the entire place.
Yep.
And then we extended it to like plates. Like anytime we were doing like a big CG environment, we had plates that we shot in New Zealand to match up with it. Like even the big frozen waterfall, we had a frozen waterfall, a frozen cliff, the gigantic frozen cliff, and a snowy valley below that we went and shot with the helicopter. And those three ingredients came back into the frozen waterfall. You know,
Amazing.
Yeah, and it's a good way to work because you give the artist something real.
Yes.
And you pick lighting on the day in the helicopter. You know, there's a lot of things that, as you know, this is a lighting TD.
Yeah.
When you can do everything, you're kind of in trouble.
Yes. No, references are key.
Yeah. Because
visual effects artists work way better with reference. Make it look like this. Got it.
Yeah. It stops arguments. You know what I mean? Like I still remember, you know, like we'd show the Hulk and it would be like, well, I think he's too yellow. And he's in a blue room and on the helicarrier, let's say, with some you know, warm lights around. And it's like, well, I think he's too yellow. And another person, I think he's too minty green. Right. You know, and you realize like, uh-oh. And then when you start talking about Iron Man's red and like, oh, I think it's to this and I think it's to that. When you have a single shot of a piece of Iron Man's armor on film with the same camera in the same lighting, the argument has ended.
Yes. Over.
It's over.
Red. Done.
And yeah, it's such a beautiful thing that's why when you see visual effects supervisors pushing for, no, I'm going to get the reference. I'm going to put that thing out there and photograph it. It's because that way later you're like, oh, I feel like it's a little dark. Well, I'm sorry about your feeling, but that's not too dark.
Yep. That's the best way to win an argument. It's like, here's a real thing. There you go. That's what it's supposed to look like.
The argument is over. And you guys, I want to go on a platform and just like preach to the world that we're all bad at guessing what's real and fake. Like, you know, people online, oh, that's AI. Oh, this is, you know, people casually toss out their expert opinions. Oh, the problem is the motion blur about, you know, and chances are you're seeing a problem, but not the problem.
Right.
You know,
and also this is an argument that I talk about often when people start to blame CG for problems. And then really what the problem is that it's a bad movie and you're looking at too much of the CG. You're not paying attention to the story. It's like, actually the CG is pretty awesome. Maybe the story sucks.
even if the CG is a problem, it's not the problem.
Right.
So
Well, let's. I want. So what are some of the things that happened in season 2 that were sort of like a big challenge for you guys? Yeah.
Well, I think that this was like a dream again because as a creature guy, season 1 was a lot of environment work, and I love that stuff too. Like I'm just as big of a fanboy for, you know, Mike Pangrazio and you know, all of the matte painter gurus. So doing environments and focusing on that was really fun, and I think I did sharpen up on that a little bit, working with the kind of people that I got to work with. But on season 2, it was creatures. It was we did about, I think it was like 18 hero new creatures that were like needed to be figured out. You know, like, you know, the Balrog is based on a memory of a poem of a thing, you know, that we have in our minds. So there's something there already thanks to the guys at Weta and John Howe and all the history there. So that's one thing, and it's beautiful work. But you know, there's other things that we hadn't seen before, like what's an Entwife going to look like, you know, and how do you not just do what Peter Jackson did? So there's all this scary stuff in there about
there's this preconceptions of like what it's supposed to look like.
Well, and what we kept saying, and the reason I said poem is like, you want to rhyme with that stuff. You don't want to be discordant with it. Like if they've already laid down a melody in our minds, you don't want to come in and say, I've got a better idea, you know, with your like, you know, one-man band outfit. And you can do that if you have a better idea. And occasionally we try to branch out. But sometimes you just have to kind of say, like, okay, what are the paintings I grew up with? How many millions of us saw those? What did Tolkien write? What did he say about it? That's really the guide. But I'll tell you what, Tolkien is very clever. He does not explain the details of these things. If you look at the way he describes the Balrog, it's poetry. It is poetry. I mean, the way he talks about wings or not wings is poetry. The words are chosen so carefully, and it's chosen because for you it's going to set up a framework that your brain fills in, and for me it sets up the same framework, but my brain fills it in with what I want to see, and that's great for the readers. But for us, it's like, I guess it's great as well because it lets us be creative. But it's also like we have to fill in those gaps because you got to put it on the screen,
right?
You know. And so this season was kind of like it's a lot darker, right? And the creature work is a lot more substantial. You know what I mean? Like there's if I look at the middle of the season, you've got like the mud creature attack, and then the Ents, and then the Barrow-wights. It's kind of like right after each other, right? One after another, and each one of those things demanded thought, demanded meditation on what we're trying to do. Like even just Ents, it's like, well, you take a tree and you slap a face on it and you put arms on it. No, we wanted to kind of go back to the first principles and say like, what really is interesting about this idea? Even if Tolkien did write them fairly bipedal, he wrote them like people with skin and stuff. But if you embrace the tree side of them, what does that do? What does that give you in the story? Like, and you don't say they have 2 arms. You say they have like 19 branches, and they can use them for whatever they want. And you don't say they have 2 legs, and their face might be here or here, depending on what their mood is. Like if listeners are astute watching season 2. You'll see a moment there where one of the Ents actually has more than one mouth, and I don't think I've ever seen it mentioned yet. So it's a kind of a natural transition people don't notice. But there's one line that's built in with like a certain energy, and there's another line that's built in with another. And as she's talking with one, she kind of transitions into talking with the other, and that's what I want. Like when I look at a tree, it's like I see a caricature there, and it's good for this one mood.
Yeah. But
another line or a knot forms an ooh, like that could be used for another sentence, Yeah. It's so much fun. But you can tell there's a lot to think about. And we're lucky we had the vendors we do. Cuz everybody really did amazing work, but it's like creativity nonstop for 3 years, and or 2.5. You realize that like when let's say any movie you idolize, right? You could say Peter Jackson's trilogy, which is one of the best of all time, or you could pick some other person. And when you think about them making that movie, we tend to kind of pretend that they had 50 years to make every decision and do it right and go back and fix it. And the reality was Ridley Scott's set burned down, and they were gluing horns to the horses' heads, and they were flopping around and coming off, and you don't think about the fact that those questions come at you, about every 3 seconds, and you've got to be. You only have to mess those up about once or twice as a supervisor, and feel that feeling of like I had an opportunity and I let it go by. Yeah. To never want to have that happen again. So it's a bit relentless on a thing this big. It just keeps going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's very, very true, and challenging for sure. Yeah. What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously, things have evolved quite a bit over the years, and things have changed especially from your perspective in the creature world. Yeah. What are the biggest changes that you've noticed in the 25 years of the way that creatures are created?
That's amazing. That is actually a really good question because. In many, many, many ways, not a lot, actually. Like, if you look at kind of what's really happening under the hood, there's not a lot that has really revolutionized. Now, I will say that, with computers getting faster and everything, simulation is being used more and more. Of course, neural networks are... Yeah, you're right. Which is a game changer, actually. As an artist, if you can see it real time and you can feel it and you can tune it right then, it's a game changer. But really, it's still a skin, bound to bones, maybe through some anatomy, in simulations. Sure. But things are pretty similar. I think what's on the horizon is potentially just a brand new way to look at things, which is exciting but also scary. It's like I think that's, I'll just say anything machine learning or neural networks is definitely the biggest thing that's happened in the last 25 years because it's probably bigger than the internet, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's going to, we don't really know the impact of it, but we do know it's not, we have been, at the same time, I think that like in visual effects, like we have been using some form of machine learning for 20 years. We just didn't call it that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is going to help me
and...
write my script a little better, will you do this? Or it's like this, simulations we use neural networks on simulations all the time. Or machine learning specifically. But but it's now that suddenly it's like, we might be moving away from polygons.
yes, totally. Like, and I was thinking about radiosity. It's like, and I hear about Gaussian splatting, and I'm like, oh, radiosity, Gaussian splatting. Oh, like peanut butter and chocolate. Like, you start to see these new things that pop up. And like, why didn't we think of? We had photon mapping. What were we doing with that? Why weren't we doing Gaussian splatting?
Well, I think Gaussian splatting is a fascinating one because honestly, it was so interesting. Like I have been working at what did I call it? Sorry, I'm blanking. Light fields. I've been looking at light fields
Love
forever,
that.
and light fields were like way too much data, like so much data, right?
It was just academic, right?
Right, and but at the same time, it's like, it's like pixels, but you have direction to them.
I love it,
And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, so what's the smarter version of that? It's like, nerfs, right? Nerfs, and then I was like, you know what? That's that's too complicated. Let's just do, basically harmonics on a point cloud. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
Are you doing that? Splatting. Well,
that's what that is. Oh, I say, okay.
That's what Gaussian splatting is.
Yes, okay.
In a sense.
Okay.
I'm just simplifying it, but I was like suddenly like done.
That is really cool, isn't it? It's you think everything's been done, and that's the other thing I would say to any student who's like, oh man, I got here right when it ended. What we've been saying that for 100 years, So don't think that.
In fact, you were sort of joining at a point of transition, right? Where those creatures being done, right? And so now, like people in school are like, it's about to change again, right? It's going to be like those guys when the guy came up to you is like, don't do makeup, it's going to change everything. It's going to be the same guy. People in school right now is like, don't learn how to model rig like this. Everything's going to change.
It's funny because it's always something, and it's always not what we think. When I started at ILM, one of the biggest things that was like keeping me up at night was like, okay, I got lucky by having access to these $45,000 SGI machines.
Yep.
Luckily, what we do is like, it's kept a little tighter because of you have to get on those machines, so it's a bit harder to get access, and that creates a buffer, I guess, against competition. I had this thing in my head of like, okay, well, at least there's this gigantic cost, which is such a silly thing to think, and it's like kind of an awful thing, but at the time I joined ILM, it was like suddenly, no, you can get Maya on a Dell, and what?
Yeah.
What? And then the next year, and it's free. What?
Right. Yep.
And then what you realize is that, the only thing that matters in all of this, throughout all of the centuries and everything that we've talked about is nonsense except for your individual creativity.
Yeah.
And
the barrier to entry is your creativity as opposed to the dollars you spend on things.
Yeah. And when you get to AI stuff, which is what we're talking about and hinting at, that's where I think that's where your human creativity. I've heard people say, "Well, then my creativity doesn't matter anymore."
It does. Totally.
More. It becomes paramount, right?
Yeah.
You have to be the person in the driver's seat because something is figuring out some of it for you. Yeah. And by the way, like there's a debate going on right now. Do these networks really understand? Can they do anything creative? And the answer that I have seen is that they can. And how creative you want to say that is another thing. But they can certainly interpolate between references and influences, right? Like we do, right? We do the same thing.
Right.
And I think I've seen them extrapolate to some degree.
But they're not making the decisions. The person that's looking at it and telling it what to do is making the decision, right? And I've seen the best stuff that I've seen that's created from AI comes from actual artists who have huge amount of training. Yeah.
That's the point. Yeah. What you realize, and here's another way to think about it. Imagine like this prompt jockey, right? Or, or an AI bro, right? And he sits down at his typewriter and he writes out all the stuff that he wants to make this AI do. It's going to be let's say it's going to be a series of frames, a movie with sound and music, right?
Sure.
And he types it up and he finishes it and it says every detail of what he wants that thing to be. And he sends it off to the AI because he's an AI bro. And he gets this movie back and he says, no, I don't like that take. I want this thing. And I don't like that thing. I want this thing. And he says no to this music and yes to that music. And then at the end of the day, he's not making he's not making the artwork for what C-3PO should look like, but he picked the one that matched his reference, and he said, "I want it to look like the robot from Metropolis" in his prompt, and you know the intelligence that picked up that note, Ralph McQuarrie, then gave him some choices, and he said, "That's C-3PO right there." We already have a framework for talking about people and creativity that comes through the creativity of others through a text prompt. You know, on set, a director has a big megaphone because they're going to prompt people. You know,
yes,
you know,
that's exactly right.
They don't hop out there and take over.
They're not sitting there moving the lights around. They're not sitting there. No, they're asking someone else to do it. Yep.
They don't write the music. They don't edit. Yep. Sometimes they don't write the script. Even
that's true. Most of the time they don't.
Yeah, but we still will credit them as a genius if they get the prompt right. And I'm not saying this is equal by any means.
No, I understand what you're saying.
But there's an interesting parallel there. That if you sit down and you try to do it, I've seen it with music. Music is something right now that's exploding in what generative stuff can do to a degree that's like really funny. It's actually incredibly interesting. I've seen that like, wow, what I put into this really actually does out of the 10,000 things I could generate. You know, what you put in really does only lead to the one you want if you're very, very, very thoughtful about every step of it, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where we go, but there's all ethical things too that we haven't dealt with.
There's a ton of ethical things, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed. There's a lot of people that are dealing with it, which is good. They're dealing with it in the correct way, which is the legal way.
Yeah.
As opposed to the court of public opinion.
Yes,
But yeah, I think that's good that they're doing that. But what's next for you? Obviously, this is a big thing that's just wrapped, and it's very exciting. Are you presenting? You said something is going on tonight. You're doing something tonight?
Yeah, we're gonna do a little thing for the VES tonight. So
very good.
Yeah, it's gonna be really exciting. I think it's about maybe in a little over an hour from now, and it's I'm gonna have Joe who did scale. We'll have Einar Martinson, who was art director and like a concept designer, kind of like a right hand man for keeping shots going, and paint overs and things like that. That I'll do them if I have time, but on this number of shots you can't do it. Yeah. And then we've got Ara from Rodeo, who supervised the Ents and the Barrow Whites, and nice. It's going to be a fun conversation, and we're just again so glad to talk.
Yeah, it's funny. I just got a message. One of my coworkers, she just got into the VES, and she's so excited. And she said, she's like, "Oh, today I've already got an event, and it's with the Rings." I was like, funny coincidence. I'm talking to Jason Smith in about 20 minutes. So it's like really,
that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Well, this is really cool. So that's great. And then after obviously all of this, I mean, what are you looking forward to after this?
Well, again, I consider this kind of a dream project. Every season is going to be different, and the work that we're doing and the people that I'm working with. I just have to say again, it's like I'm really fortunate, and I mean, lateral, people who report that way, and people who are working as vendors, and people who I work for. It's just everybody cares, and everybody is pushing to make the best thing they possibly know how, without compromise. And I think that's what I want. Like, if I'm going to go to work, it's a waste of time if I come out with 80%. Somebody else might say it's 80%, but I want to know that for me, it was 100% of what I was capable and my team was capable of. Right. And season 3 is what I want to do. So, we'll go down that road, and I think there's a lot of fun stuff to do. And from there, it's hard to say. I find myself, my computer science background, I find it peeking in the back of my head. And I find like I'm conflicted between not being satisfied with the type of work that we do being increasingly done by machines, but also being incredibly awestruck by the technology and the beauty of it and what it can do, and like writing my own alarm clock in this technology that can tell I didn't leave yet. You know, it can. Right. It's got my camera and it can say you haven't left yet. Right. I think that there's we're in a weird time, and I think that maybe what I'll do is I'll just say to the students, you know, like that when I heard Chris say, you know, tonight that like I have a notable career, it's a shock because you don't notice it along the way. You notice it maybe looking back. I
think one thing I want to emphasize, and I think is important, you just said to students, like you didn't think you should do this. You became a pre-med student, right? Yeah. Because you thought that was the safer thing to do.
That's right. Yeah.
And you nonetheless, you still did it. And you're like, you know what? Take that risk of what you were good at, and look at where you ended up. And I think people need to realize that that is an important thing to do. Like there's a risk that you can take, and your career can be amazing.
And even when I jumped into CG and VFX, just to let everybody know, I eliminated this job. I eliminated so many things for myself because I tried things and I wouldn't produce the results that I was happy with, and I would say, okay, well, let me stick with what I'm. And yeah, you learn that like don't limit yourself. Right. Like don't limit yourself. Give yourself a chance to learn how things work and learn the vocabulary of each craft. And I feel really lucky, but I think there's a lot of cool stuff left to do. Mm-hmm. Even with the new technology that's coming out, there's a lot of cool stuff. So I wouldn't get too discouraged. I think there's a bright future ahead.
I think filmmaking is going to change completely, and it's going to be a whole new point. And this is the opportunity for you to be a pioneer.
Yeah. Now, if you want to talk about where that's going to go in like 40 years,
who knows?
Pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah.
Get home and say, I want to see the Silmarillion directed by Steven Spielberg, starring, you know.
But think back to 30 years ago, you know, Jurassic Park, and we were all like, this is going to change filmmaking forever. And here we are 30 years later, and it's like, you know, it's just expected.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Amazing.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you. Like, it really is a pleasure to kind of look back on things and kind of see, you know, what got me where I am. And you know, I think the industry changes a lot. And the tools change, and it doesn't matter that you know Maya or Blender or whatever. I guess it is the people that you know that you know how to work with. The knowing how to be creative with another human, and just keep drawing. That's what I would say too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's been amazing seeing you, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun to chat.